Here we go, Dark Sector. Dark Sector is a new action game that can best be described as Gears with a glaive. In other words, if you're a rabid Gears of War freak, Sector should tide you over until the inevitable sequel hits this November. Add the throwing blade from the cult hit Crawl into the mix, a Resident Evil style plague that creates a horde of shambling monstrosities, and you get a pretty cool action game that may not be completely original, but blends a lot of elements together nicely. You play as Hayden Tenno, an at first intriguing anti-hero doing some covert ops stuff in the fictional country of Lazria. How's that for political correctness? Let's not piss off any real countries, mercenaries playground of destruction style, South Korea anyone? Instead, we'll just invent a new one. Anyway, it works. Unfortunately, the lead character, excellently voiced though he is by actor Michael Rosenbaum,
I can't do this again. Just stay focused.
Doesn't live up to initial expectations, and neither does the story. It's the usual outbreak scenario we've seen countless times, and the details quickly get muddled. In this way, and a few design elements as well, it reminded me of Capcom's Lost Planet. Starts with a bang, ends with a predictable whimper. Oh well, guess the medium hasn't hit literary strides yet this side of the Thief series. In development since '04, the delay definitely didn't take a toll on the graphics, which are excellent, if vaguely reminiscent of the aforementioned Gears. Gee, wonder why that could be. Anyway, this one's a real looker, next gen through and through. It does lack polish, however. Clipping issues abound as well as other strange warts. Think Jessica Simpson before the Proactive worked, acne and all, and you've got an idea. Gameplay, however, is key, and it's pretty cool. Gunplay does its thing without bullet sponging enemies, Gears reference again, although it's the glaive that justifiably takes center stage here. You'll use it more often than the guns. Point of fact, since you can upgrade your guns with added abilities like extended clips and heavier firepower, and you can't carry two-fisted weapons and still use the glaive, you'll more than likely just pick a handgun and combo it up with your Pimp My Shuriken and stick with it. Adding further incentive not to nab fallen foes' firearms is the fact that they'd self-destruct in about 30 seconds. Kind of a random idea that I'm not sure about. Variety isn't the spice of life in Hayden's world, apparently. But that's okay, since the glaive has the ability to absorb electric energy as well as fire and ice, and the touch option, which allows you to control the flight of this spinning blade of death, hardly ever gets old. In fact, the devs even make sure you'll need to master this ability to complete the game's various environmental puzzles, although at times these can act as tedious roadblocks instead of stimulating brain teasings. Gears takes all credit for the cover and fire routine, but technically it's a game called Kill Switch we owe that particular honor to, and it was a pretty cool game in its own right. Either way, the cover fire mechanic is put to the test here, perfectly imitating Gears in all but the blind fire mode. Unfortunately, your ability to stick to walls and other cover points is more frustrating here because some enemies will charge you blindly, Crimson Head style, and while trying to evade them you can instead render yourself helpless to their attacks while you're glued to the nearest wall when you meant to roll out of the way instead. Boss encounters are a highlight. Whether you're facing a giant hulking monstrosity that would make the Hulk turn green with envy, hold on, you get the idea. Either way, the bosses are pretty cool even if their patterns do become fairly predictable after a few tries. Having said that, Sector is the kind of game that relies on its gimmick to a fault, and that gimmick is the glaive. Despite some added abilities like cloaking and shielding, relying on the glaive so often can become a bit of a chore. The entire glaive handgun combo is only occasionally mixed up with some now requisite vehicle combat sections and brand new enemy types. So the 9 levels in Sector not only feel appropriate, you get the sense that if there were a 10th chapter you'd just yawn your way through it. Unless of course they add something entirely new to the mix. Remember Halo Combat Evolved when you first met the Flood? Enough said. In any case, however, Sector is a good game, not a great one by any means. In fact, it's that cool game that you damn near forget the moment you finish it, but maybe in a few years it might inspire you to dust it off and give it another playthrough. In other words, I absolutely don't hate it, but it could have been better had the story been more coherent and the gameplay just a tad more diverse. In any case, maybe a sequel can accomplish just that, and I'll be in line to nab a copy. P.S. In my review of Dark Messiah of Might and Magic, I neglected to mention that the game may or may not force Xbox 360 owners to update via Xbox Live before they can play it. To some, such as myself, who don't have a convenient internet hookup handy, this is a real pain in the ass that deserves to be mentioned, and I hereby deduct 1 point from my final score regarding the Xbox 360 version of that game. Because even if you have a convenient connection, it's still, once you paid the full price for the game and you walked out of the store, you should be able to pop it in and play it. This is not a PC.